Oliveira, Oliveira Lawyers. Today is Sunday, March the 29th. We are starting at 3:32 Rio de Janeiro time. And as usual, if you're here with us, you have a priority to choose topics of your interest to be discussed. If you happen to have questions, I'm going to do my best to answer them. I cannot address facts in this specific to a great length because you're not supposed to provide like online consultations in a public environment and without charging. Both the Brazilian Bar Association and the Portuguese Bar Association, they preclude us from providing free advisory. All right, but I'm free to discuss topics in general. So if you have a question, even though I may not exactly answer your question, I will, as much as I can, to discuss that topic in particular. I hope that makes sense. And we're going to take a look at news. And guess what we're going to see as main news in different newspapers. And if you've been following us, you probably bet correctly. It's a Banco Master case, and it's not about the bank itself, but it is about fraud, and it is also about, identifying corruption. And here, this is a headline from Estadão, or Estado de São Paulo, which is one of the 2 or 3 largest newspapers in Brazil. And the headline says, Case Master, how he was working, the behind the scenes that created the largest financial fraud practiced in the country, right? So it's not about the banking system, it's more about like the fraud, and it's also about the involvement of different categories of the Brazilian government into this fraud. There are many names coming from the Congress. There are names coming from the Brazilian Supreme Court and many other, bodies integrating the Brazilian government. So that's why, this news headline is so repetitive, right? Like every time we're going to take a look at the newspapers, yes, you're going to see, stuff about the Banco Master. Another thing that I think is very interesting, right? Like this is another headline, and it says that the family of Justice Alexandre de Moraes was earning like 645 times more for services provided to Banco Master, the banco that went under because of fraud. So his family was earning like 645 times more than other attorneys would charge for the same service, right? That's the headline. That's not my opinion, just sharing what I see here on my screen. And yes, that's it. Of course, there is also a concern about the cost of gas. Here's actually about diesel. But as you may tell, every single country or economy is concerned about the outcomes of the war in Iran, right? So there you go. These are some of the main headlines. Let's take a look at Brazil Nomad Max States. And as you probably know, they are a partner of our firm, and they provide real estate agency services. So if you need like a list of potential properties meeting your requirements, you can get in touch. You can talk to Remax Nomad States, and I'm sure they're going to take good care of you. They've been working with several clients of ours. All right, let's see if we have any messages so far. We have a Tora. Boa tarde, senhor Oliveira. Boa tarde, Tora. Good to see you over here. Matt Gaines, bom domingo. Dr. Oliveira, bom domingo, Matt and Adrian. Good to see you both. And we have a Timothy. Hello from Massachusetts. Hello, Timothy. All right, so I see at least 3 of our friends live here. Let us know topics of your interest so we can discuss here live. And if you don't suggest topics, what I do, I end up addressing, like recent topics of our consultations. And we also keep a backlog here of topics of interest. Sometimes we have like ongoing clients and they like us to discuss some topics during our live streams, all right? So let me know what you would like to hear today. And in the meantime, we're going to be discussing about purchase of real estate in Brazil. And this is a recurring question, right? Like, the best destinations for one to buy a property in Brazil. And some of the concerns are going to go like this. Safety is, of course, a major concern. There is another common requirement is that, foreign citizens, they want to make sure if they need to unload, if they need to sell the property that they are buying down the line, if they are going to be able to do so. And naturally, this is going to come with a different answer depending on the target area. And in my experience, is going to depend on the, mostly on the price tag for the property. So if it is like a lower cost, a lower amount property, then it doesn't really matter where you're buying. There is always some level of buyer activity. Now, to increase your chances, particularly for higher amount properties, you're gonna want to buy in kind of well-known locations. And I'm gonna give you an example. I think it's gonna make it easy to understand the distinction. So in the state of Rio de Janeiro, if you're buying a property in Copacabana, Ipanema, or Leblon, guess what? There is always a large number of buyers, both from Brazil, like the nationals, and from abroad as well. Not surprisingly, because those neighborhoods, they are super famous abroad. Now, in the same state, if you happen to decide to buy a property in the countryside of Rio de Janeiro, this dynamic is going to change substantially, even though there are, for instance, active like in Teresópolis and in other cities in the inner side, in the countryside of Rio de Janeiro. The number of foreign citizens active in those areas is going to be substantially lower, and therefore this is going to represent a smaller buyer base for your property. Okay, so I have an example, and I think I shared here before. It was if I recall correctly, it was a couple from the United States. They bought 2 large properties in the inner side, in the countryside of Rio de Janeiro. They paid about R$1 million, and then they spent an additional $1.5 million, and it was like 2 properties in the same land. And I know that in total, I think they spent about, between buying the land, the properties, and the renovations, they probably spent between R$4 to R$5 million. And when they got in touch with us, I think they were trying to sell those properties for about 5 years. And I'm sure that during those 5 years, they were very amenable to providing, a big discount. But even with a discount, they could not identify a prospective buyer for those properties. And then, on the other hand, if you think about properties in those 3 neighborhoods I told you about in Rio de Janeiro, guess what? Yes, sometimes you may need to give a discount, to provide a discount, particularly if you bought a property for an amount higher than you should. But there is always a large number of prospective buyers in those neighborhoods, right? So I think you kind of get the idea. If you buy in a more remote area that's not really well known, guess what? You know, you're not going to have a large number of people searching for properties in that particular area, right? So the message here is like, if you want to have something that's going to be easy to sell down the line, you should stick to the main destinations in Brazil. So in Rio de Janeiro, we're talking about, you know, the South Zone. There is also Barra da Tijuca, right? If you want something more historic in the city of Rio de Janeiro, you can go for Santa Teresa. Santa Teresa is closer to downtown. It's a kind of hill, and they have, you know, like constructions like from 200 or 300 years ago, really nice properties over there. You can go with the less famous beach areas, like in closer to the downtown, between downtown and South Zone, which is Flamengo, Botafogo. There is also Gloria, and they are all good destinations. But the point is, like, you know, a very good number of buyers at any given time. Other cities that you may consider, if your top concern is like, you know, safety, guess what? It's very difficult to beat Florianopolis. Florianopolis is a huge island that performs as the capital of Santa Catarina. And there are so many different areas within the island. So there is the more, you know, like urban, if you will, part, which is going to be Beira-Mar, which is by downtown, and it has most of the public services and government entities in the island. They're going to be, you know, between Beira-Mar and Agronômica, and that's where we have our office in Florianopolis, by the way. And then you have a very different or more distant areas such as Trindade. There is Jurerê Internacional. There is Santo Antônio de Lisboa. There are so many nice neighborhoods in Florianopolis. And in Florianopolis, I think you can go wrong. Maybe you may overpay if you're dealing by yourself with a seller. But you know, very easy to sell a property down the line if you buy it correctly. Also in the northeast of Brazil, I usually recommend you, if again, you know, to exit down the line is important to you, to stick with the capitals. There are several capitals in the northeast. Some of the most famous ones are going to be Natal, Fortaleza, Salvador, and Recife, right? These are some of the most famous ones. There is also João Pessoa. And if you buy at the capital, you know, that's usually the main city in that particular northeast state. And guess what? Buyer and sellers activity is going to be substantially higher at those capitals. Now, if you're buying, again, in the countryside, if you're buying in a smaller, like, you know, a fisherman village, you are going to be paying substantially less. But when it's time to sell, guess what? Not as many buyers as you would want to have. All right, so there you go. These are, you know, some tips for you when deciding where to buy. Let's see what we have. Tora, obrigado por sua presença aqui nesse domingo. Estou aprendendo mais do retirement visa. How long is the retirement visa granted for? Taura, você é muito bem-vinda. Continue fazendo as perguntas. All right, in terms of the timeline, that's a good question, Tora, and I'm going to tell you why. Because many retirees, they get upset with the timing structure of the retirement visa. The retirement visa, when you apply in Brazil, it's been granted recently for just a year, right? So they give you first 1 year, and before this 1 year expires, you need to renew when you renew, they typically give you for 2 years. So 1 year first, and then 2 years. And then before those 2 years expire, you can apply to have, hopefully, the third issuance of the residency at that time. And it's going to be for undetermined period of time, or, you could think about as the, permanent residency version of the retirement. So again, typical, right? 1 year, and then 2 years, and then the permanent residency. That's not how the Brazilian immigration calls it. Like the immigration calls residência por prazo indeterminado, right? Like, I mean, it's just a fancy way of saying permanent residency, and the emphasis on the prazo indeterminado, or for an undetermined period of time, is just so they can take away from you if something bad happens. Like if you have a criminal issue in Brazil, or if for some reason, you're not bringing money from the United States, like they want to have a way out of this residency that they gave it to you. And at least in the Brazilian government's head, if they are calling it permanent residency, they cannot take away from you, right? Like, I mean, it's just like a silly distinction, but explaining to you why sometimes I'm going to say permanent residency and other times I'm going to call it residência por prazo indeterminado. Okay, now an issue on top of this, three different timelines, Tora, is that some clients, they have an unrealistic expectation in terms of how much control we have over immigration, because many times, between applying, providing documents, and you securing the residency card, this can easily take like 6 months, all right, from beginning to the day you're going to get your physical card. That can easily take 6 months. And then guess what? In some states, when you get to the card is going to show the remaining period of time accounting for whatever you spent in Brazil. So let's say if you're waiting in Brazil for 6 months, when you get the card, there is a substantial probability that the card is going to show only 6 months remaining. And some clients, they are going to get mad at us. They're going to say, well, I got the card, but the card is just showing 6 months. What went wrong? Like nothing went wrong. That's how the Brazilian immigration is going to calculate, because they're going to say, listen, if you've been here under the application for a retirement, guess what? We're just going to give you the balance, okay? And that's going to depend on the state. Different states, they are going to have different dynamics. For instance, in Santa Catarina, right? Florianópolis, Camboriú, other cities in Santa Catarina, typically they give you a really hard time to secure the appointment, but many times they are going to use the date of the appointment as the start time for your residency in Brazil. So it's like you suffer more to get to the appointment, but once you get to the appointment, they are not going to use the timeline that you've been in Brazil as part of your residency card timeline, if you will. Okay, but that's more or less, Tora, how it works. Very interesting. When you apply, like in the United States, sometimes they are going to give you 2 years. And when you apply in Brazil, more consistently, they are going to give you 1 year of initial residency in Brazil. All right, let's see what else we have. We have Matt. Does the U.S. driver license need to be apostilled by the U.S. state of issue in order to obtain a Brazilian driver license? Matt, that's a great question. That's a great question. I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. I would assume, getting an apostille on your U.S. driver license, it wouldn't hurt. Actually, it would make your document more reliable to the Brazilian to the Brazilian authorities. Okay, like we do assist with driver licenses. Is a more like a secondary type of service we have. We don't like much because there is a much higher degree of friction when you are applying for the driver license, just because the Brazilian DMV, if you will, like they are not really used to foreign citizens. So chances are, whenever you're dealing with them, guess what? You're going to be interacting with an agent, with a government employee who has no idea, how to handle the case for a foreign citizen. And whenever they're going to reach out to their supervisor, sometimes the supervisor does know, sometimes they don't. So it's a lot of friction, okay, to obtain the driver license. And from this perspective, yes, I think, getting an apostilled version of your driver license, it may be a good idea for your application for a Brazilian driver license. We do that often. Like, I don't typically handle the paperwork, but whenever you're using our service, feel free to just ask this question within the, your client board, and then our team is going to reply, is going to, give an answer based on our prior applications. All right, I hope that was helpful, Matt. Tora, can rural property be bought in Brazil after acquiring the RNM? Tora, so the RNM, it makes easier for you to be able to attend the closing for rural property, because like when you read the text or the provisions within the specific law addressing purchase of real estate, purchase of rural real estate by foreign citizens, you're going to see that there is a mention that the foreign citizen is going to be using the foreign citizens RNM for the closing, okay? But that's all. The RNM is going to allow you to attend the closing, but it's not going to allow you to skip or to overcome the many restrictions that exist in Brazil for the purchase of rural real estate by foreign citizens. And I can tell you the main ones are going to be about size. So if you want to buy something smaller, typically you can get it done, particularly after you get to the RNM. But if you're trying to buy either larger properties, or if you're trying to buy, like this more like odd varieties of rural land, let's say lands, in the Amazon, okay, or lands by the border, or lands by a body of water, or lands by a Brazilian military bases. So that's when the real problem starts, okay? So, the problem categories are either large tracts of land or land that is going to have some kind of, additional concern to the Brazilian legislator. And then we have a bunch of individual laws addressing those things that I told you. And I can repeat now just for clarity. So land by, some type of military base, land by the border, land by bodies of water, and what else? I think I'm missing one section. All right, so bodies of water, military bases, border, and Amazon, right? And the category is not actually by the Amazon. It is because, like in the Amazon, most land, they don't have, proper records at the cartório, and therefore they rely on a different type of registry. It's a more like, exception basis registry. And when you are a foreign citizen, guess what? The authorities handling that specific registry for land, they are not going to even consider you as a candidate, right? So whenever you're pursuing land in the Amazon, typically it's a really long shot. Even if you're trying to buy a smaller tract of urban land, And talking about land in the Amazon, like, I mean, very, like atypical cases like we see over time. Sometimes people come to us and say, well, I want to buy land in the Amazon. I know I cannot buy it, and therefore I'm going to buy it under the name of a friend, right? Like, guess if we're going to get it into this type of transaction, of course we're not going to do it, right? Because whenever you're trying to circumvent restrictions by, pretending that you're buying, or you're buying on the name of a friend, the chances of a bad outcome, they're just like too high, right? We don't want to get entangled in drama. Like many times you have a Brazilian friend that's going to buy the land for you, and then 10 years down the line, you want to, sell this land, and the Brazilian friend forgot that it was bought by you on his name, and guess what? Are you going to go to a judge and explain like the fraudulent scheme that you created in the first place? Of course, you're not going to do it, right? So whenever we see those kind of weird cases or weird attempts of buying land in the Amazon, like we typically will decline the representation. Okay, Tora, but I hope that was helpful. Again, Tora, what is the minimum stay requirement in Brazil to maintain my retirement visa? Tora, there is no language in the regulation for the Brazil retirement visa or residency. We actually use a common sense approach, and we say, listen, whenever it's time for you to renew this residency, they are going to be able to take a look at your prior residency. And I think it should make sense, right? Like, I mean, if you just stayed for, I don't know, like 10 days, I think it would be legitimate for the immigration to ask, why are you trying to renew if you never stayed the first time? Because, the retirement residency is provided for people who really want to stay in Brazil. Okay, now I can tell you from our experience, we have people who stay in Brazil like for 4 months a year, 5 months a year, and they don't have any issue. But they do have like a meaningful footprint in Brazil. They're going to have like either a lease, or they bought a property. They have utility bills on their names. Like, the Brazilian immigration can tell that they've been living in Brazil for at least a few, months and year. So that's more or less our recommendation, Tora. Since there is no clear language anywhere stating a minimum amount of time, it is that you stay in Brazil time enough to justify a meaningful presence in the country, and therefore allow you to renew the residency when the time comes. Okay, General Principal. Olá, Senhor Oliveira. Hope everything's well. Good to see you, General Principal. I enjoyed the video on the experience with Polícia Federal in Lapa. Thank you for that unique insight. I'm glad you like it, General Principal. Yes, we're trying to share a little bit about the experience with the Brazilian Federal Police. And for those of you who don't know, like whenever you are applying for residency in Brazil, most of the time, that's not the case for every single residency, and I can give you some distinctions in a bit. But let's say for the digital nomad, for the retirement, for the investor residency, it always starts with the a central application center that is in Brasilia. They are located in Brasilia and accessible through an application environment, right, called Migrante Web. And I think, the version nowadays is 2.0, so Migrante Web 2.0. And this is on a national basis. That's how you apply for the residency, and that's how you get approved. Now, the interesting part, after you get approved, then you're gonna need to attend like an appointment / interview with the Brazilian Federal Police. And then naturally, this appointment is not gonna be in Brasilia, right? This appointment is gonna be in the Brazilian Federal Police, closer closest to your location. And if you are in São Paulo, it's typically Polícia Federal in Lapa. Lapa is a neighborhood. That's the one that General Principal just mentioned. It's a really large office. And guess what? They have very specific requirements. And they are not the same requirements that the Brazilian Federal Police is going to have when they are sitting in Florianópolis. So different cities, different requirements, different behaviors, right? And what we're trying to do is to publish some videos addressing this like major Brazilian Federal Police station. So this one in Lapa is the one that is representative of how the Brazilian Federal Police behaves when in São Paulo state. And we also recorded, I think it is in the works, we also recorded one for Florianópolis, right? Of course, we cannot record one for every single state or capital, but the idea here is that we're gonna be recording a video for each of these main destinations, right? The typical ones that you probably know what they are, okay? But I'm glad you enjoyed General Principal. Thank you for sharing over here. All right, Timothy. When applying for family reunion visa in Brazil and buying property at the same time, do I need to conform to the same strict purchase money requirements you have described for the real estate visa? All right, a lot of good stuff here. Family reunion visa in Brazil. Okay, so when you're applying for family reunion and you are physically in Brazil, Timothy, we're gonna call it family reunion residency, okay, not visa. Visas, they are issued abroad, outside of Brazil. If you are already physically in Brazil, we're gonna call it residency. And then I'm gonna go back to General Principal's comment, because I said I was going to make a distinction because not every single residency is gonna start in Brasilia. And the family reunion residency, that's actually one of them. Timothy, when you apply, let's say if you are in São Paulo and you're gonna apply for the family reunion residency, guess what? You don't start in Brasilia. There is no need for you to use the Migrant Web 2.0 system. You're gonna actually interact directly with the Brazilian Federal Police in São Paulo. Okay, and so that was the distinction that I said I was going to provide during General Principal's comment. Now, going back to Timothy's question, right? So when applying for the family reunion visa in Brazil and buying property at the same time, do I need to conform to the same strict purchase money requirements you have described for the real estate visa? Timothy, so it depends. It depends if you're gonna apply for the real estate investor visa or not. Some people, even though they have the family reunion residency, okay, even though they have the possibility of requesting this type of residency, they are still gonna pursue the real estate investor residency instead. And why is that? It is because when you secure the family reunion residency in Brazil, you're gonna trigger tax residency automatically. All right, so that's something very serious, right? Many people, they move to Brazil in stages, like they're not moving at once, and therefore they want to avoid the tax residency in Brazil as much as possible. So even though, let's say, the foreign citizen is married to a Brazilian and could ask for the family reunion residency at any given time, they are going to postpone that as much as possible so they can enjoy the possibility of staying in Brazil for longer without triggering the tax residency. Okay, now just because I spoke about tax residency, I also want to highlight that if you stay in Brazil for over 183 days in any given 365, and I'm not talking about calendar year, it's a moving bracket, try to catch you. If you exceed 183 days in any given 365, you're going to become a tax resident no matter what. So the situation here is some people, they want to buy real estate in Brazil. They want to start spending like, 3 to 6 months a year in Brazil without triggering the tax residency, right? So if your desire is to stay in Brazil between 3 and 6 months a year in Brazil without triggering yet the tax residency, in this case, you're going to pursue the Brazil real estate investor residency and not the family reunion residency. I know it's a lot, and I'm glad we are recording here because you can always, watch this, record the live stream down the line, to get the nuances. But this is the main reason, Timothy, why some people, they are not going to pursue the family reunion residency. Okay, so that was part of the answer to you. And in terms of the money requirements, yes, whenever we are pretty, let's say, pretty detailed, or we are pretty strict about how you're going to send the money to Brazil, that's typically because you need to prove that the money came in a very specific manner for the purpose of the Brazil real estate investor, either visa or residency. Now, if you are settled on applying for the family reunion residency, guess what? You are more flexible on how you're going to send the money to Brazil, okay? But not too flexible, right? You also want to do it in a certain manner so you're not going to have, issues with the Brazilian Revenue Service or, other entities down the line. But yes, if you have no concerns about the Brazil real estate investor visa or residency, there is much more flexibility on how you can send the money to Brazil. And the most typical one is to basically just open a non-resident bank account. That's the type of account you should open when you're not residing in Brazil yet, the non-resident bank account. And you can start to send the money like, with a certain frequency. Let's say this month, I don't know, you have like a $5,000 amount like that you can send over. You send this 5,000. Maybe in a couple of months, you have an additional 10 and so on. And then you can keep sending this money until you have enough in Brazil to buy real estate. All right. I hope that was helpful, Timothy. Tora, if we were to be refused to the retirement visa upon the first time applying, can we repeat the process and apply again? Tora, very interesting. Yes, you can. You are not like precluded from applying to the Brazil retirement visa or residency if you were denied before. Like we had the clients in very rare circumstances in which they could not get the paperwork on time. And guess what? Because they could not deliver the paperwork on time, they were denied the retirement visa. And then, after a couple of months, they would materialize the required document, and therefore they could simply apply again. All right, Tora? Marisa Navas, olá, doutor Luciano, estávamos na expectativa da sua live. Obrigado, Marisa, bom vê-los aqui, bom vê-los, Ricardo, Marisa, muito obrigado pelo apoio. All right, we have Sidia. Sidia, I have 2 clients and few students that pay me for my digital services. That's around 17 to 2,000 per month, so I'm good to go for me and my wife for digital nomad. Sidia, there are, 2 components to my answer to you over here, right? Like one answer is going to be regarding how you're going to present your income. And the other piece is where are you applying from, right? So to make it very clear, if you are applying at the consulate level, right, outside of the United States, Western Europe, right, and the United States, guess what? Even if you meet those requirements, they may deny your digital nomad visa, right? Particularly, like, I mean, I'm not talking about you, right? I'm just like explaining the dynamic. If you are applying, like in Africa, if you are applying in Asia, right? If you are applying in the Middle East, guess what? You could have $10,000 as income, and they are not gonna care, right? Like they may very easily deny the digital nomad to you, and that's through the consulate. Okay, now if you are applying while you're physically in Brazil, then typically, the central authority, the central immigration authority in Brasilia, they are not gonna make a distinction, because in their heads, and I want to explain the reason why. There is a distinction at the consulate level, and there is no distinction when you are applying physically in Brazil. When you are applying in Brazil, the mindset is that, guess what? You are already in Brazil. So most probably some type of consulate blessed your entry in Brazil, and therefore the central authority doesn't need to care anymore where you're coming from. Now, if you're still abroad, if you're dealing with a consulate, the consulate has an unsaid mission of controlling immigration into the country. And the mindset that consulates in Africa, Middle East, and some parts of Asia they have is very clearly that most people who would be granted a digital nomad visa in those countries, they are never coming to Brazil for a year or two. They are coming to live in Brazil. And therefore, even if you have a $5,000 income, guess what? They don't want to give you the digital nomad visa, all right? So that was the first part of my reply. Let's talk about the second one. And note, like, before you guys say, well, he said he was not allowed to discuss things in details, I'm just discussing in general, right? Like we're talking about requirements. I'm not reviewing your facts, your specifics in details. I'm actually talking about how law and regulation apply in general. So I hope I'm doing okay here from the bar associations perspective. But going back to Cydia and the other part of the answer, let's talk about when you are applying in Brazil, because typically at the consulate they also have different ways of assessing your income. So we're gonna talk about how the Brazilian central immigration is going to review income requirements. They are typically going to want to see bank statements. Okay, they don't like W-2s. They don't like paperwork coming from payroll. They don't care about those things. They care about bank statements. So they are going to look into your bank statements, and they are going to want you to see money coming into your bank statement that is going to be paid by the same entity who's providing your letter of verification. That's another typical requirement. The Brazilian Central Immigration Authority, they want to see a single, typically, all right, a single letter from a company attesting to your work, your remote work done abroad. And let's say if company ABC is providing you this letter, they want to look into your bank statements and see this money coming from company ABC. All right, Cydia. Now, if you want to, discuss about how to connect your few students, clients, and so on, then you need to schedule a consultation to see if there is feasibility for your application or not. And then naturally, if you're starting to discuss about facts that are specific to you, we cannot do over here in our live stream, but you are welcome to schedule a consultation to discuss. All right, general principle. When pursuing citizenship via the real estate visa, can the foreigner sell the real estate when they become a permanent indefinite resident, or do they have to wait until they acquire citizenship? A general principle, my recommendation would be for you to wait for at least 4 years of permanent residency, because with 4 years of permanent residency, even if you lose your card, you can reapply for permanent residency based on the fact that you've been a permanent resident for 4 years. Okay, my understanding is that if you lose your card like within 2 years of permanent residency and you are reapplying for a card, guess what? They would potentially inquiry about the basis for your permanent residency. And the basis for your permanent residency is not the fact that you've been 4 years as a property owner. The basis for that is that you still have the real estate, right? So my recommendation is wait for at least 4 years of permanent residency, and then yes, you could sell this property without concern, because if you reapply for the permanent residency, there is a specific category of permanent residency in Brazil that goes like this. If you've been living in Brazil as a permanent resident for at least 4 years for any reason, I don't care what reason, guess what? You can reapply for the permanent residency based on the fact that you've been living in Brazil for 4 years, right? And the most common use for this route, and I think it's going to be clear why there is such a route, is because of marriages, right? So many times, like, there is a couple, a foreign citizen and a Brazilian, they come to live in Brazil, and then the foreign citizen is going to secure the permanent residency. Let's say they be living in Brazil for 5 years, and then, let's say if they divorce, in this case, the divorcee foreign citizen, they are no longer able to apply for permanent residency, because guess what? There is no longer a marriage. But because they've been living in Brazil for 4 years, they're going to use that fact as the basis for an application for permanent residency, right? And this 4-year permanent residency qualification, it does work for a bunch of things, including permanent residency by real estate. All right, so that's the reasoning, general principle, why we recommend that you don't sell the property until you've been living in Brazil for at least 4 years under the permanent residency. All right, Sidia. Secondly, I am avail digital nomad visa services from you. How would it be more beneficial of me being applying directly? So Sidia, first thing is like to help you know if you are qualified or not, right? Like, because we don't know yet. The second thing is to advise you on the potential paths for you to apply. Okay, like let's say if you are abroad, and you are unsure if you can, how can I say, if you are abroad and you don't have any other visa to come into Brazil, typically we would be concerned about getting your business, because in our opinion, and that's something very very specific to our office. I'm not telling it's like general advisory. I'm telling you it's our personal opinion. If you don't have a visa yet to come to Brazil, typically we don't think that the digital nomad is going to be a good route. All right, so that's the bottom line, Sidia. First, to know if you qualify, and if you do, to envision what's going to be the best pathway for you, advise on documents, file things, and work with you throughout this journey. Hermon, afternoon, everyone. Afternoon, Hermon. Good to see you over here. Any questions, Hermon? Let us know. Hermon is being with us for a while. Tora, how long do we need to have the retirement visa before applying for the permanent residency? Tora, so the most conservative timeline, it goes like this. You enter Brazil, you apply for the retirement residency, right? Because if you entered Brazil under like a visitor visa, a tourist visa, when you secure the retirement is going to be a residency, okay? That's the distinction. Whenever you apply abroad, outside of Brazil, we call it a visa. whenever you are applying while physically in Brazil, we're going to call it a residency. So let's say if you're coming from the United States, you entered Brazil, and now you applied for the retirement residency. Typically, you're going to get a 1-year residency. Before the 1 year expires, guess what? You need to renew. You renew, now you're going to get 2 years of temporary residency. So first it was 1 year, second was 2 years. Before the end of those 2 years, you can apply for renewal, and typically we secure the permanent residency for you. So we're talking about 3 years before you land the permanent residency in Brazil. All right, Tora, I hope that was helpful. Let's see if we have anything else. In the meantime, if you wanna like our content here, just a reminder, if you like our live stream, you're gonna help our business, and I appreciate that. I thank you for that. And you're also gonna help this content to become easier to find for other people just like you. So do us a favor, like this live stream. If you're not following us yet, you can subscribe and follow us for more content. We are publishing many videos, right? Thank you, General Principal, again for highlighting that you enjoyed one of our recent videos. But yes, if you follow us, if you subscribe, you're gonna typically get a notification of new content. So yes, do that. And I'm also gonna remind you guys about Remax Nomad States. Even though they are in Rio de Janeiro, they have been helping us. They've been helping us with clients through FAO Brazil. Every now and then we have some clients showing up here at the live stream, sharing appreciation for the services. Listen, they are realtors typically, right? You're gonna just pay, you're not gonna pay anything actually to them because they are typically paid by the seller, right? So for real estate, I would say if you're interested in buying something in Brazil, give them a shot, and you're not gonna, lose anything. The opposite, you're typically gonna, benefit, because for them to work with us, we are very strict on the types of properties that they should be, presenting to you guys. So you will start from a very different, start point, if you will. All right. All right. We have another question. We have a question by the James Allen. Good afternoon. I'm physically in Brazil at the time, and we will start the process with you. Glad you're here, James. For the digital nomad residency this week, is there a city that's best to start the process with you in? James, so it doesn't make much of a difference where you are starting. It does make a difference when we get you to the appointment stage. Okay, so I'm not sure if you were here at the beginning of our live stream. I was explaining the dynamic. When you're physically in Brazil, this process always starts in Brasilia, which is where the Brazilian Central Immigration Authority is located. So they are going to review your application. And at least for that stage, it makes no difference. Like if you are in the Amazon, if you're in São Paulo, Florianópolis, Northeast, anywhere you are, this stage is going to be the same. However, once we get you approved, then you're gonna attend an appointment with the Brazilian Federal Police, and then yes, it's gonna make a substantial difference where you are. We particularly like the Brazilian Federal Police in Rio de Janeiro. That's where we have most of our immigration team members. They are located in Rio de Janeiro, even though we have in Brasilia, in São Paulo, and now we are getting started in Florianópolis as well. But most of them, they are in Rio de Janeiro. But it's not only because of that. It is also because the Brazilian Federal Police, they are very friendly to foreign citizens in Brazil, in our experience, right? It doesn't mean your experience. And I'm talking about any of you, it's going to be perfect if you are in Rio. But it means that in average, they are more friendly, they offer faster appointments, they are more amenable to exceptions. And in my opinion, believe it or not, and listen, I am from Sao Paulo, right? In my opinion, the worst location for you to be is going to be Sao Paulo, right? And I don't know, I'm not sure if it is for some cultural issue with people from Sao Paulo, but you know, the Brazilian Federal Police in Sao Paulo, it just makes people miserable, right? Like whenever they see an exception going on, they're going to jump into that, and they are going to, you know, make the foreign citizen to come back another day to obtain additional documents, and it's just recurring. It's a pain in the neck. Okay, now, you know, to be honest, there is a massive number of applicants in Sao Paulo, you know, substantially higher than in Rio de Janeiro, believe it or not. And listen, Rio de Janeiro is already dealing with, you know, a ton of applicants, but Sao Paulo is a different ballgame, right? Like it's the largest city in Brazil. Foreign citizens, not only like from developed countries, but particularly from the borders of Brazil, like Venezuelans, like Colombians, people from Argentina, from other countries. Guess what? They all flock into Sao Paulo because, again, Sao Paulo is the business engine of the country, right? So I get it, you know, like, I mean, if Sao Paulo, Brazilian Federal Police would, I don't know, I mean, try to accommodate, maybe they wouldn't be able to function. But I'm here, you know, like answering a question. Maybe I got carried away. But the point is, first stage, James, it makes no difference. Second stage, yes, it makes a difference. We like particularly Rio de Janeiro. We think that Sao Paulo is like too. In Sao Paulo, there is too much friction for applicants. Santa Catarina, right? Santa Catarina, the downside is that they don't have appointments like for the next 2 or 3 months. Upside, most of the time, not always, is that they're going to give you a residency that's going to start after your appointment, while in other states, typically, they are going to look back into your date of entry. All right, so different locations, different standards. But if you want to, you know, just hear a place that we typically like, Rio de Janeiro is the answer, James. ISD, great content. Muito obrigado. You're welcome, ISD. Thank you so much for sharing. Matt Gaines, and that's going to be our last one. And remember, our next live stream is scheduled for Wednesday. You can find our Wednesday live stream already scheduled on YouTube. If you just click on notify me, you're not gonna miss our content on Wednesday. But let's take the last one from Matt and Adrian. Does the attorney attend during their client's interview with the federal police? Matt, we do that. We do that in Brasilia, Rio de Janeiro, and Sao Paulo, right? So these are the 3 locations in which we have like, you know, available personnel to go with you. Now, if you need someone, let's say if you are applying, you know, to a different city, what we can do is like to secure someone from that city, like, you know, an attorney from that city to go with you on the day of the appointment. Now, depending on the city, they may be amenable to someone who's closely connected to the foreign citizen to attend the appointment or not. Okay, so it depends on the city, but if you feel better with someone, you know, to go with you, of course, like there would be an additional fee because we're going to be basically hiring someone from that target city to go with you. But if you are attending, you know, like the appointment in Rio de Janeiro, São Paulo, Brasilia, then yes, we typically go with you. All right, Tora, thank you very much. You pretty welcome, Tora. So I want to say thank you all for your participation today. Very interesting questions, inviting you to attend our live stream next Wednesday. And remember, on Wednesday is not the same time. On Sundays, we meet at 3:30 Rio de Janeiro time, and on Wednesdays, we meet a bit earlier in the day. We meet at 12:30 Rio de Janeiro time. Wishing you all